That said, it turns out that only 10, at least in the United States, now that this thing is rolling out, only the experience is that only 10% of patients actually download their information from their electronic medical record. So, I mean, it's just not like everybody's clamoring for their information and wants it. It's there if you want it, but actually a very small percentage of the population, and there are all kinds of reasons for that, but that's a fact. So maybe it'll increase, maybe it'll decrease, who knows? The other wild card is, and Eugene, maybe you can address this, is we're starting to see more and more players getting into the game, whether they are health information exchanges, so-called health HIEs. There's something called the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, which is essentially a network of HIEs around the country, United States, that is being driven by the Office of the National Coordinator for Digital Health. Amazon just announced their first enterprise company to launch their virtual care platform. So there's all kinds of folks that are getting in this game that are, the gorillas in the room. We're talking, the big players, retail, CVS, big tech, big device, you name it.
Yeah.
So where do you go with all this? I mean, if you're a startup, let alone in the interoperability data fabric business, how do you see that? What's the strategy?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and we've discussed this in the past, and you've given us some excellent advice about that in the early days, which we probably should have listened a lot more carefully. but fundamentally, you're kind of weighing in the kind of the typical sort of questions every startup asks in the beginning, which is what I'm trying to offer relevant, who's it relevant for, and how do I do my product market match? And so in the case that we're in right now, and by the way, this is a kind of an ongoing process. This is not something that you have kind of an instant coffee type of a situation, is we find ourselves constantly speaking to the professionals. In other words, I cannot imagine building a product and wait for people to come, specifically in this industry, that you don't talk to the clinicians, to the nurses, to folks like the chief medical information and chief health information officers. So they are the fabric that have to deal, the human fabric that have to deal with the issues and the problems at hand. And so we're kind of dialed into a process of interviewing individuals who we consider key players in various parts of the workflow, because as we again spoke about this and we find out, healthcare is about the workflow. It is about the handoff of the history in time and in the process of delivering care from one part to another. And so for a startup, it's incredibly important to continuously dial in into the changing environment, in the dynamics of the individuals and groups that are responsible for the care process. So a couple of years ago, I started drawing maps of the patient journey from the start of their kind of a care, through the process to the end, whatever that end may be. And so for us, that's kind of the process that we continuously tune, and it also affects how we pivot our solution and how we pivot, the sort of the finite points of what we deliver.
Yeah, that patient journey comment is very important, and I mean, a customer journey mapping is sort of a common technique now. It may not be as recognized by some doctor entrepreneurs as others, but it's a pretty important concept. And I've spoken to several of you offline about, well, what do I do next? And this product testing paradigm, which is a constant iteration. You create a model, you test it, you get the results, you go back and you change the model, you go back and test it. It's back and forth and back and forth. If you have not seen this book, you should read it. And there's a website that goes with it, and it's a really good book. It's got a lot of pictures inside for those of us who are visual learners, and there's a lot of good stuff in it. And it's just a way to kind of learn how to do this. Because the last thing in the world you want to do, and there's lots of them, is create a solution looking for a problem. And that's the trick. So how do you identify, how do you get in the head of the customer and, make the journey map? And actually, there was just a recent article in the Harvard Business Review about post-COVID, which is pretty interesting, with customer mapping. And I suggest you read that as well. So, Brandon, you have a question? Do you want to tell us who you are and ask your question?
For sure. Well, thank you for having this event. My name is Brandon. I'm a researcher at Holland Bloorview and a grad student at the University of Toronto. So my question was you mentioned that patients now have the power to sign off before giving their data to an organization. And in my work, many of the applications I have to make, you always, for example, in a natural language model, you always have to de-identify the text before you feed it into the algorithms. And so when patients consent to giving their data to organizations, is the organization accountable for de-identifying before feeding it into their algorithms they're creating?
Anthony, you might want to chime in on the answer to that too, from a data science perspective. So Eugene, what's your take?
Yeah, so so first and foremost, if the organization provides a data set, then without a doubt, and by law, they have to de-identify it. And according to the HIPAA regulation, and there's a lot that goes into it. It's one of the biggest challenges in R&D here, just like it is for you. Now, the interesting challenge from perspective of patient offering their data to a researcher is something that I personally haven't seen or discussed yet myself, because this is literally today is May 7th, from April 5th and May 7th, there hasn't been a lot of time. So what we do know and what we have seen is technical solutions that offer and this is mostly for the benefit of big pharma, no surprise there, but where there's a solution that sits inside the network, inside the framework of a provider organization that does the data selection, data de-identification, and then it pushes it out to the pharmaceutical company that does the R&D. But on an individual basis, a patient having their electronic record and being approached by a research facility saying, I would like to engage your data, I haven't seen an example myself personally. So this is where I'm saying this is complete new ground, and we're just literally observing this happening in front of us at the moment.